when we saw schools starting to teach STL, we started getting candidates who had no idea what STL was doing under the hood.
Welcome to the LabVIEW Experiment. I am your host, Sam Taggart from SAS Workshops. In my 15 years of working with and training developers, I've had the opportunity to conduct a lot of experiments. Over here, we believe in embracing failure as the essential learning experience that it is. And what better way to learn than from other people's mistakes? In this podcast, I talk to industry experts, colleagues, and friends about their failures and how they have turned them into future successes. I'm here today with Greg Richardson from NI. He's a member of NI R&D. If you went to GDevCon NA, you might have met him, and you may have seen his presentation. So welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so I guess we should start the topic by saying that there's been a change at NI recently, as many people probably have noticed. And as you put it, NI is reinvesting in its core products, including LabVIEW. One of the reinvestments was sending Greg to GDevCon NA, and then also Greg McCaskill and Chetan also both went to
Hmm.
GDevCon over in Europe. So I thought I'd have some of you on and just going to discuss what it's like to be an R&D engineer at NI and work on LabVIEW and all kinds of other cool stuff that we can come up with. So,
Okay.
um,
Uh,
actually, before we get started, I'm curious, as someone who hasn't, I don't know. Well, first of all, have you been involved in the LabVIEW community before GDevCon NA? Because I don't know that I've seen your name come up all that often, but
um, I've definitely been involved during NI Week and NI Connect
Mhm.
um, for a long time, but didn't get out much beyond that. And so, yeah, now I'm in a situation where I am getting those opportunities. So I came to GDevCon NA, getting out and doing customer visits. Um, so it's good to get more direct interaction with customers for the engineering team.
so just overall, like, what was your impression of GDevCon NA? Like, did you have any preconceived ideas of what it was, and like, did it live up to them, or?
Um, I've been to other conferences, so it was more or less what I expected. Um, it was great to see, you know, some of the topics that were really kind of pushing the envelope of, you know, LabVIEW's capabilities. Uh, we always want to see people trying to expand what they can do in LabVIEW, and then we will try to empower that as best we can.
Yeah. So just out of curiosity, what is the coolest thing, like GDevCon NA or otherwise, that you've seen people do with LabVIEW that you're like, wow, that was amazing?
Um, this shows a bit of my um, predisposition, but I get really excited when people talk about their infrastructure, their CI CD processes. It's the automation. Seeing that our customers are developing good software engineering processes is very rewarding to a guy who graduated with a CS degree. I didn't come at this from the, you know, electronics standpoint. I came in as a computer scientist. And so we like to say that, LabVIEW doesn't require that level of knowledge, but applying computer science concepts to your LabVIEW usage will get you a lot further.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think it depends on what you're trying to apply LabVIEW to, right? And I think that Stephen, I've heard often refer to the two hump camel problem of like, you've got a bunch of people who are just dabblers and engineers and technicians and physicists or whatever, and they just need to automate some small little thing in their lab. And to do that, in all honesty, you really don't necessarily need to be a computer scientist. It can
Yeah,
help,
yeah,
some computer science stuff, but like you can be successful without it. The problem becomes when those people then start working on larger and larger systems, and at some point you like there's like a switch from being a dabbler or a technician to being like software engineer, software architect, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and that's a natural thing in all of software. It's not unique to LabVIEW. And AI is changing how far people can get initially in other languages. Um, but as their application grows, they still hit that kind of wall where the decisions they made early on start getting in their way later, without some better uh, philosophies behind it.
Yeah, that's I guess that's it. Yeah, sometimes you make those decisions early on and you don't have all the information. You don't realize it's not understanding the trade-offs. I think that's a lot
Yeah,
of what I mean, engineering in general is all about trade-offs. So it's about understanding like, okay, if I do it this way, here's where that hits a wall or where it runs into problems, and and then trying to figure out like, am I ever going to hit that point or not, and think
right.
that a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's those trade-offs. A lot of it comes down to, how you break things up. What are the a lot of it comes down to abstractions. We always want to make abstractions that take away, that hide the unnecessary detail, make it simpler.
Hmm.
And so as you build up in software, you want to make sure that the abstractions fit the application you're using or trying to build. And a lot of times when people get into trouble, it's because they didn't really abstract the complexity. They're showing all this complexity throughout all the levels of their application, or they chose non-optimally in their abstractions and then start feeling like they're fighting the concepts they introduced.
So that's a very interesting topic. So I'm sure you're familiar with, do you know Joel Spolsky at all? So name probably rings a bell. Yeah. He wrote an article, something about leaky abstractions. And I think that's like really pertinent. And I think it also relates back to your talk at GDevCon NA as well, because like LabVIEW itself is an abstraction, right? And we're writing stuff in LabVIEW and it's doing the low level memory management stuff. And one of your presentations was on like strings and string copies and stuff like that and optimizing stuff. And sometimes it doesn't matter, but no matter how good your abstractions, I feel like there's always like corner cases and leaky things where like you kind of want to have some understanding of what's going on underneath the hood.
Yeah, um, that was a big topic of conversation years ago in the LabVIEW team, talking about standard template libraries, the C++ standard template library. And when we saw schools starting to teach STL, we started getting candidates who had no idea what STL was doing under the hood. Um, and that makes it really hard for you to optimize your usage of something when you don't have any clue what's going on underneath. So you need some level of understanding, um, but at the same time, you want your abstractions to be solid enough that most of the time you just think in that abstraction. You don't have to dig into the details. But when you're really trying to optimize, it helps to understand the details.
Yeah, it's kind of like I know how to do that, but I don't have to manually do that myself, and therefore I can trust that the abstraction is going to do it okay, or at least in
Yeah.
that reasonable way most of the time.
Yeah.
And just kind
Hmm.
of knowing where those edge cases are and either avoiding them or like being very careful when you get near them to make sure you're doing things right.
Yeah. And if you're having to fight it too much, it may mean you picked the wrong tool for the job. And,
Yeah.
and that abstraction wasn't quite right.
Well, also too, I wonder, is there a thing to be said for like developing good habits? Like, for example, right? Like if you're just doing array stuff in LabVIEW or strings, right? Always concatenating on the end instead of concatenating onto the front, just like as a habit, right? Does it make sense to try to build and enforce some of those habits just to keep you away from the edge cases and corner cases?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and in your example, yes, adding an element to the end of an array is more efficient than adding it to the beginning
Mhm.
because we have to move all the other elements down to make room for the one we're putting in.
Yeah, and that's one of those problems too, where like it doesn't scale well, but at small scale, it's fine. But
Yeah.
if you have an element of like five things in your array, like who cares if she shifts things around? You get
Hmm.
5,000 or 10,000 or whatever it is, or millions, then it becomes a problem.
Yeah. And having an algorithm that gets, exponentially slower each time you are operating on more elements is fine, unless your number of elements is gets bigger. And yeah, that's comes up all the time.
Well, I find that because most LabVIEW programmers are not computer science people, I don't think they understand a lot of them. Some of them certainly do, but like the big
Hmm.
O notation and all of that, that I'm
Hmm.
sure I'm not a computer scientist, but I've read enough computer science books to know that that's probably drilled into people in computer science classes.
Yeah,
So
talked a lot about it. And yeah, we're always on the lookout for n squared algorithms.
yeah, and it's deceivingly easy to write those if you're not careful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just trying to build up a list of items. You think, okay, well, there's n items, so that's a straightforward thing. But if you're looking for duplicates each time, then checking for the duplicate each time is what turns it into an n squared algorithm. It means the more elements you have in your list, the slower it's going to get.
More things you have to check to see if it matches.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's
So
interesting.
there's all kinds of inventive ways around um, that being so problematic.
Yeah. So I guess I have a question. Like how much, so if you want to be a more serious LabVIEW engineer, right? You want to work on those bigger, more challenging problems. Do you have any recommendations or thoughts for like LabVIEW engineers who are maybe making that transition and trying to learn some of the computer science side of things? Like, are there certain topics that are like, if like top list of topics or something?
Um, I don't have anything too specific because I don't know that anyone's ever asked me that before. Um, but yeah, like design patterns, um, not necessarily because, most design patterns are probably presented in some textual language,
Mhm.
but the concepts still translate. Um, any theory about object-oriented programming, class design, inheritance, um, again, are concepts that translate to LabVIEW if you study them.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree with that. From my non-computer science background, those things are useful. Do you have perhaps a list of like common mistakes that you see people make?
Um, the biggest one by far is just not knowing when to make a sub VI,
Ah,
just putting too much code in one diagram.
do you
So,
have like a rough size that would be like I know I've read there's like a book like 5 lines of code or something like every so every function should be less than five. Well, that's kind of extreme, but do you have like a like how do I know my VI is getting too large?
yeah, another way of saying it is, every function, every VI should do one thing.
Yeah.
And if you're having trouble describing what the one thing is for a VI, that probably means it's doing too many things.
Mhm.
Um, now, what's the appropriate size to do that one thing in? Well, it depends. If the one thing is, you know, doing some analysis on an array, then that may be just a few nodes. If the one thing is actually handling your UI, then you may
That's a
have an
lot of
event
things.
structure with a whole bunch of frames in it,
Yeah.
and it's going to be bigger. But within that event structure, think about how much code you're putting directly in there, because a lot of those may be more appropriate to just be every event structure has one sub VI in it, and the
Mhm.
sub VI does all the work. Um, so none of these are hard rules, but
Yeah. Well, the one that I always tell people is if you're trying to name your sub VI and it's like does A and B and C, like that should be like a big red flag.
Yeah. Naming is another important part of any programming because you need to be able to refine um, that thing the next time you're doing, need to do the same thing again. And yeah,
Yeah, that's
naming it
yeah.
is traditionally listed as one of the top problems in computer science overall.
Yeah, well, I
Uh,
think that is part of the problem too, because you get up with a large code base, and if you're not real careful about marking stuff for reuse or something, you end up writing the same thing that somebody else already wrote because you can't find it
yeah,
kind of problem.
yeah, and we it's not that uncommon to find multiple copies of something, and then trying to merge those back together is just a pain.
Yeah, that is one thing in LabVIEW. I feel like if I were to improve any one thing about LabVIEW, I would really love to see a good set of refactoring tools. There are some refactoring things built in, and there are some things there, but there's a handful of things that are missing or could be better.
Yeah,
And
now
renaming, relinking, and replacing VIs is one of but I feel like classes are the ones that really suffer from that. Like renaming and moving classes and stuff. I feel like there's this mantra among all the LabVIEW developers that like you got to get your class hierarchy right the first time and don't ever change anything because as soon as you start changing things, then everything breaks.
yeah, it can get more difficult. There have been a few attempts at trying to, make tooling to make that easier. Um, the problem is there's so many variations on exactly what the user wants to do
Yep.
that we've had a hard time coming up with anything to add to the core product.
Yeah, that was what came out of my conversation with Eli because he was basically like, we technically could do that, but it'd be better if the community did that because like you all know what you need better than an I does per se. So, and I think there is
Well,
a lot of value in that. And I think from an I side, I think just providing the hooks and making that easy, and then like, here are the hooks to design what the tools that you need, and then go do that.
yeah. And, people have been pretty successful with some of the stuff they've added through the right click framework.
Hmm.
Um, but there's much more that could be done.
Yeah, there are actually a lot. Q, I think Quentin did a presentation on all the different ways to hook into the LabVIEW IDE, and there are quite a few. So, tools menu, project provider, all these things.
Hmm.
Project provider is one that I know I've talked to Eli about before that could use a little love because it works, but it's difficult to use. So,
It's a little bit clunky,
yep,
but as you say, it works, and so it's been kind of left alone for a while.
yep,
Uh, if you know, i-
yeah,
if enough people are interested in it, then that can always be something we look at.
yeah, yeah. No, well, as I progress further, I become very sensitive to the idea that yes, there are lots of things that I'd like to see improved and changed, but it's a matter of balancing resources, and you know, even a giant company like NI has limited resources, and so like,
Yeah,
which features would I rather have? And I don't know, I have to say, like, as much as I complain about certain things missing, overall, I'm pretty happy with the direction things are going, at least at the moment. So,
yeah, and you know, I've been working with Lobby R&D for 33 years, and for 32 and a half, and we've always had a longer list of things to do than we have time to do them.
yep.
So uh, prioritization is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, combination of prioritization and also managing expectations too, I think, and making sure that people understand. Because I know, like when I first started, I was like, "Edna is a giant company; they can afford to do all this stuff," and I'm like, "Yeah, they really can't," because there's just time and
And
resource constraints. And
yeah, and NI does a lot of things.
yep, yeah, yeah, and then
Uh,
yeah, and
la-
NI is not just doing LabVIEW either; they've got a lot
right.
of other products and things that they're working on as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, running my own business definitely taught me a lot of those lessons. So it helps a lot to just kind of understand what's going on.
Hmm.
So
As the year is ending, many of you may be working on your budget for next year. If training is in your company budget, SAS workshops can help. In 2025, we will be offering these workshops: Beyond NI, How to Be Effective in LabVIEW; CICD, DQMH training, unit testing, and our newest workshop, Refactoring. In addition to these scheduled workshops, we offer private classes, one-on-one coaching, and custom training. You can find the full schedule at sasworkshops.com or by using the link in the show notes. Whether you're just starting your software development education or you're looking to take your skills to the next level, SAS Workshops is prepared to help you grow.
You mentioned CI/CD stuff. Do you help people? Do you do a lot of CI/CD in LabVIEW itself? Do you help people set that up, or like what is that?
I mean, we have extensive builds to help us produce LabVIEW.
Mhm.
So I'm involved in CI/CD from that standpoint.
Ah,
Um, and some of that is written in LabVIEW. So, we have to deal with how do we review LabVIEW code in a pull request, just like everybody else.
yeah, yeah.
And so we've made some tools there to play around with and learn. And, that's one of the things we'll be looking to get out to others in the not, hopefully not too distant future. Um, but it's also, we I have talked to customers who are trying to do it themselves and help them, find the ways that avoid the most obstacles. Um, but then also talking to customers who really aren't doing a lot and encouraging them of the value of spending time on it, um, to, yeah, make them more efficient.
So I'm kind of curious because I have this impression that CI/CD is easier in text-based languages than it is in LabVIEW. Is that true, or is it also still complicated and a pain in the butt in text-based languages as well, just different problems?
Um, in some respects, it's not that different. You're still doing all the same things. The thing that does make it a little bit different is in text-based languages, more people have done it before you. LabVIEW has a large user base, but it's large in terms of test and measurement, not large in terms of the overall software industry. So you've just got fewer examples to work from. But I think we're really getting to a point where um, enough people have done it for us to learn where the real obstacles are and be able to start addressing those. I think one of the things that we'll see in the not too distant future is getting LabVIEW to work better inside containers, because containerization has become such a fundamental piece of a lot of CI/CD processes. And we are setting up um, a test pipeline for the icon editor project that has been made open source on GitHub. And it's going to be using containers. It's going to be, we want to use these open source projects as examples of, the right way to do these operations.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, and that's good. I've been talking about that for quite a while. Because, like, I mean, for my biggest use case is like if I'm doing stuff in Python, I can tell my GitLab CI to just use the latest Python Docker image. I don't have to set up a runner or anything. And
Yeah.
so that would be really nice if there was some way to do that in LabVIEW, so I don't have to set up a separate runner.
Yeah. Um, right now, the container images are not being created by NI, but we want to move in the direction of, yeah, we can be the ones that create the images for each release, and then anyone can use them.
Yeah, yeah. No, my ideal thing is just Docker run LabVIEW,
Mhm.
whatever, and it just
Yeah.
spins and works. And yeah,
Yeah.
someday we'll get there. Moving to-
We should be able to. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really cool. Do you see so a lot of that Docker stuff is using it in CI/CD stuff. Would there ever be a way to like use it for development environments as well?
Um, it's not out of the question. Docker is more focused on kind of the headless operation,
Hmm.
but it can be used in interactive scenarios. Um, it's for development, it's a little bit overlapping with what we've done with the save version.
Hmm.
So with the save version, you can use the latest editor, but still keep your source in an earlier version. So you're not necessarily having to run different versions of LabVIEW to work on different projects. You can use the latest editor, and each project stores its VIs in the appropriate version. So, figuring out how we split our investment between trying to make the save version be even better versus potentially using Docker to solve a similar problem, just something we'd have to evaluate.
Yeah, I guess that's worth thinking about. Yeah, because why would you necessarily care to be using the older version of the editor, I guess, if you were just editing it and building it into an executable that's going to run somewhere else, like the editor version
Yeah.
in
So
theory
for
shouldn't matter. You should probably want the latest ones because they'll have the most features and
yeah, to do the build, you may want that older lab view.
yeah.
But again, that's something you should probably be automating.
Hmm.
So that doesn't necessarily have to be part of the developer workflow.
Yeah, I just know now for my workflow, those are both kind of tied because I start by creating the build machine because I'm not doing the Docker thing yet, so I have to actually build a machine. So I build it and then I clone that machine and that becomes my development machine. So they're kind of linked.
Yeah, yeah.
They wouldn't necessarily have to be.
No,
Yeah.
they wouldn't. As long as you can, um, dependency management is significant. As long as you find the right approach to make sure you get the right dependencies for both situations, should be fine.
Yeah. Yeah, well, to your point, I think dependency management is bad in all languages. Some are better than others, but I mean, I hear Python developers complain about that all the time, and I'm sure other developers as well. So,
Yeah. Um, there are getting to be more standard tools, um, repositories for dependencies in a lot of languages. We're trying to create, um, something similar. We, did the deal year or so ago with JKI to ship Dragon
hmm.
as part of LabVIEW.
Hmm.
Uh, so, we think that provides some of the automation around dependency management that LabVIEW's been a little behind on. VIPM has become, kind of the standard of where LabVIEW packages come from, if they come from anyone other than I, and even many of ours are in there. So we kind of see that as the direction we're headed, just to try to smooth that out as much as possible.
Yeah, I'm quite happy with VIPM. I think it works quite well for what I do. So,
Yeah.
yeah. The one thing I don't like about VIPM is that the API does not quite work on Linux yet. So I'm after Jim to try to fix that because I would very much like to move to Linux. Curious, have you seen a lot of companies trying to move to Linux, or would you say a large majority are still on Windows?
Um, the majority is still on Windows. We hear a lot of companies talking about moving to Linux, um, more so than actually doing it.
Yeah, that tracks.
Um, so yeah, it's always a balance. We don't want to be the obstacle keeping them from moving to Linux. Um, so we are trying to work on that, but again, it's prioritization. If we're trying to decide, do we work on the thing that's currently blocking them today, or this thing that blocks where they want to be in the future? Well,
Yep.
we probably need to work on the things blocking them today.
Yeah, well,
But
to your earlier comment about NI's investment, I've noticed the past couple of years when I went to NI Week or NI Connect, that there's been a lot of talk about LabVIEW on Linux, and there's been user group meetings and stuff, and so it's come a
yeah,
long way. I will say, shout out to the Linux team that installing LabVIEW on Linux has gotten a lot easier in the past couple of years.
hmm
It used to be a real pain. I don't know if you ever played with that, but now it's just like I think you have to like run one script to install a repository, and then it's just like apt install LabVIEW, and it just works, which is pretty awesome.
yeah. The install experience on Linux is has a different expectation than Windows. And the kind of interdependency of so much NI software on Windows is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing when everything works well together, but the things that NIPM has to do to make the installation process work is kind of astounding.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've installed Linux, but I actually remember it being much smoother actually than on
Yeah.
Windows. Like I just remember the Windows one. Like I just remember clicking through boxes, and I remember playing like checkbox roulette because it gives you so many different options. It's like, do I need the C++ runtime for this or that? And I'm like, and I don't know. I feel sorry for people who like are new because like I kind of know what I'm doing and I don't know which one to check sometimes. So I just like usually I just stick with the defaults. I'm like that should probably work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, we're always making trade-offs of what should people get by default. Some people want minimal installations. Some people want
Install
everything
once and
installed at
everything.
once. And so it's always a little bit of a moving target.
Yeah, I know on the Champions Forum there's lots of discussion about that, and there are very strong voices on either side of that.
Yeah.
I would say,
And
yeah.
also, we go out and talk to people in government defense where they have tight security. And if it installs with LabVIEW, then they just have to get LabVIEW approved.
Hmm.
Every piece that they have to install separately needs a separate approval. So those people are saying, put everything into the LabVIEW installer. You can make it optional, but everything has to be in there. But there's limits to that. We can't put everything in there.
Yeah, well, I would say, yeah, the LabVIEW Champions group definitely tends to be, I think, more on the minimalist side. But I did teach a class recently with some people at Sandia, and they were like, yeah, like you, because I was showing them, oh, there's this cool package to XYZ. Like, yeah, we can't install that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that's definitely a challenge. Um, so we were talking about CI/CD and stuff, and you had mentioned earlier, I think, writing some scripting code in Python and PowerShell. You want to talk a little bit about that? Like, what are you using that for, and like, what's been your experience?
Um, yeah. Yes. The build system that NI uses is largely Python now. I've written some extensions to that uh, to try to get a consistent formatting of our code across for our C++ code across drivers and across application software. Um, I integrated uh, Clang format into our build system so it can be run as part of our builds. That was all in Python for PowerShell. Um, Locally, when I'm automating my own builds, uh, just trying to optimize my development process, I tend to use PowerShell there because I run, I use PowerShell as my command line.
Oh, yeah, cool.
So I do basically all my command line work from PowerShell.
Yeah, I don't know. I may be a Luddite, but for whatever reason, I do more bash stuff. And so PowerShell, like I tried to like it and I tried to get into it and it just, I don't know. Maybe I need to go revisit it.
Yeah, my switch happened while working on LabVIEW NXG. LabVIEW NXG was C# based. And so using PowerShell, which is essentially a C# based shell or a .NET based shell, gave access to a lot of things that weren't easy to do from Bash or from the command prompt. And so that was my introduction, and I've stuck with it.
Yeah, I've heard PowerShell can be quite powerful, and Bash is definitely archaic in some ways. So there's a lot of clunkiness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, using PowerShell and using Windows Terminal
Mhm.
instead of the I guess the shell that PowerShell by default uses. Windows Terminal having multiple command prompts and tabs in one window, and the command like the autocomplete
Yeah.
they use for their commands. It's quite nice.
I was gonna say the default PowerShell autocomplete, I hate. I don't know. It always just like you start typing it in, and if there's multiple options, instead of giving you a bunch, it just picks the first one, and I'm just like, that
Yeah.
always bites me. I'm like, why? But yeah, that's cool. So, you had mentioned somewhere about bringing outside influences into LabVIEW. Like, is that just general CS influence or influence from another language? Like, where do you draw inspiration from, and do you have any examples of like bringing outside ideas into LabVIEW or into like the NI R&D team?
Um, it can be anywhere. It can be general computer science stuff. It can be learning from our customers and what they're doing with lab. Um, the introduction of classes to LabVIEW was very much yeah, other languages do this. There are reasons they do it. It's good at things, at certain things. So what would that look like to bring into LabVIEW? And we did that. Um,
So I
trying
have
to,
a question about that one.
Mhm.
Is there a particular language that it was more based on? Because I know there are different approaches to classes. So, like, for example, Java and Python have very different approaches to classes.
Yeah, it was definitely looking at more compiled languages as opposed to scripting languages.
Mhm.
So C++ or C# were much more the focus there. Um, but we're always looking at the things that are different between languages and trying to decide, what makes sense for LabVIEW. And the big thing for LabVIEW was that having classes be value types. So the value flowed down the wire. When you branched, you got copies. Um, just felt like a better fit for the language than most other languages where they're reference based.
Yeah, I know there was some discussion around that. So,
Yeah.
yeah. No,
And
I think it works well. So,
yeah. And we have data value references. So if you need to have a class that's shared, then there is still an option for that.
yeah. Yeah, people still do that. And then the old Goop development suite, I think that was almost all by reference, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that was by reference.
Yeah. Yeah, there are definitely some advantages to doing by reference, but I do feel like by value tends to be the better choice in a lot of cases. Or at least that's what I use most of the time. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I would consider myself a AI skeptic, but I have started using it a little bit recently. So I do this mobbing where we work on some Python code, and the one guy was running it like every time we run a new error, he just throw it into ChatGPT and it actually output pretty good answers. So I've started doing that, and I'm it's, it's good enough. You
Yeah.
know, I haven't really had any problems. Usually it's like, okay, yeah, it's all a Python code. So it's like, oh, you need to import this or that. And I am sure that I could probably find those answers on Stack Overflow. Maybe not quite as quickly, but so I don't know. For me, it's like a maybe a better version of Stack Overflow.
Yeah. It's a quicker version in most
Yeah.
cases. So yeah, I've used it in Python. I've used it in PowerShell. I've used it in C++. Interestingly, on the LabVIEW code base in C++, I find that a lot of times um, Copilot will suggest code that I think, oh, yeah, that would be a good way for our API to look.
Ah.
But it's not quite the way our API looks because our code LabVIEW, the code base we're working in, started in the early 90s.
Hmm.
So it's not necessarily all using the latest techniques. So yeah, it suggests code that doesn't quite match the way our code works, but it's close enough that it's quicker for me to let it take the suggestion and then fix it up than to write it all myself.
Okay, so that brings up an interesting question, right? There's this whole like I don't know if you've heard of like the ship of Theseus, right? Where you like replace like one board at a time, and eventually like you've replaced the whole thing, and at what point do you have a new ship? Um, what percentage of LabVIEW would you say is still like referencing like the old code base, and is there like would you say most of it's been modernized and there's just a few things that are stuck in the old ways, or is it like
Um,
50?
the, it's kind of broad. Um, a lot of places have been modernized, but there's still some of our core pieces that just haven't been touched.
Mhm.
So, like our windowing code is still largely unchanged from when it was first written. Um, but other things like um, the way we deal with paths has been rewritten. The way we access our resource files has been rewritten. Um, so it's really kind of goes back to another software theory is clean as you go.
Mhm.
And so the things that are touched more tend to get cleaned up more. But if we're not having to touch it, then we tend to not go in there just to clean it up because anytime you're doing refactoring, there's a chance you'll break something. So yeah, it just the places that we've done more development are the things that have been modernized more.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And back on the AI topic, AI seems like something that could help you just like run a tool over this and modernize the code. Um, it's not quite there yet. Um, it's pretty good at, creating a snippet of code to do one task. Kind of gets back to what we were saying earlier about, every function should do one thing. Well, if you're trying to ask AI to write a function that does one thing, it's probably going to get pretty close. If you're trying to describe something more complicated, then it's likely to get confused. But with LabVIEW, we want to get to be on par with other languages. So we want to get to the point where it's making suggestions that are close enough that it's worth your time to accept it and then maybe have to tweak it. Um, and we put out our AI tech preview. And part of the reason it's a tech preview is because we don't feel it's quite accurate enough to really call a released product. We're not ready to put that stamp on it yet. But we're also trying to, find out what are the things that it's closest on, what are the things that could be productized, and which things are going to require more work.
So I'm kind of curious on the AI front. A lot of it has to do with training data, right?
Mhm.
And like if you look at like text-based languages like Python, there's tons of training data available on GitHub and stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, what does NI is do you does NI troll GitHub and find like open source LabVIEW things? Is that how they are training it, or they have other? Do you? create your own training data, or can you talk about that at all? I guess would be the other question.
I could talk about it. We have used every avenue, or we have at least investigated every avenue we can think of. Because LabVIEW VIs are binary files,
Hmm.
um, they are not included in the general training that all these large language models are getting. We created a textual representation. This is not of the full VI, but it's of the the functional part of the diagram.
Hmm.
So it's good enough to describe the function of the diagram. It doesn't contain any layout. It's not going to recreate your panel for you,
Hmm.
look exactly the way it was. But it describes the functionality of the VI enough. And we can translate VIs into that format, and then we can use that for training. And we've done that with um, shipping examples. We've done that with um, a lot of our like Viata Live VIs. We've also done that with um, VI source from GitHub that has permissive enough licensing for us to do it on. Um, we There are more VIs with appropriate licensing that we've had time to use. So we have not exhausted that direction, but we have had, you know, thousands of VIs go through this process. We're actually looking to see if we can develop our tooling enough then make it available to some of the people that are actually developing the large language models. So then when they get hit a VI, they can send it through our tooling, turn it into text, and then actually include that in their training. So we'd like to get LabVIEW VIs just built into these models as part of their training base. So we're
Yeah,
not having to do it ourselves.
no, that's very cool. So a question I have, and this is probably not library specific, but like, how do you vet training data in the sense that on GitHub and GitLab, right? There's probably lots of projects, and there's probably lots of them that are from kids in university who are learning and don't really know what they're doing, or people are just dabbling. And then there's like established projects that are probably pretty well run and have really good code and clean code and all of that. Is there a way to, or do you just become selective about what you train it on, or?
Um, right now, we are not very selective.
Hmm.
We're more about volume. But yes, there are ways to do that. You can, have some criteria to filter out those before they ever go in. You can also have a way of like ranking. And so something with a low rank you might only include in your training once, but something with a high rank you might include in your training multiple times. So it ends up getting weighted more. Um, so yeah, there are approaches to that.
Cool. No, yeah, it sounds exciting. I mean, I'm curious to see what comes of it. I mean, there's so much hype around the AI thing. I'm waiting for it to produce something like more useful, I guess, than what it is. But um, yeah, it'll be interesting. We'll see what happens. But
Yeah.
good that NI's on the bandwagon because there is a potential to build some really useful tools.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
also, it kind of feels nice to be in LabVIEW and not because all the Python and text-based developers are really worried about AI taking the job. I'm like, yeah, it's not coming for LabVIEW right away. So we've got some time to adjust a little bit.
Yeah. Um, you know, I don't think it's going to eliminate all programming jobs anytime in the near future. But it can make existing developers more efficient.
Hmm.
And hopefully that means the same number of developers are producing more,
Hmm.
not well, we don't need to produce more, so we'll just produce the same amount with fewer people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think we haven't programming has not taken over absolutely everything in the world yet. So there's still room to grow.
Also quite true.
Yeah, very cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, Greg. It's been a great conversation. So,
We are focusing more on LabVIEW. The future for LabVIEW is bright. Um, Looking forward to being able to deliver on some of the problems that our customers have been telling us about for a long time.
good. Oh, I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be good. All right. Thank you. That's it for today's episode of the LabVIEW Experiment. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments or questions, head over to thelabuexperiment.com and drop me a note. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the LV Experiment.